So you're ready to prep for your first session. Maybe you have a group of players and maybe even have run a session 0 already. But how do you run session 1? This video is going to assume that you're running a homebrew game. However, most of this advice should work even if you're running an adventure game. So starting off, we need to know what we're actually going to bring to the table or the computer if you're running an online game. If you watch actual plays or go on Reddit enough to see the setups that people will show off, you probably think that you need lights, music, well-crafted minis, a good battle map to make a good D&D game. The truth is, you don't need any of that. Some of the best D&D I've played in was in Theater of the Mind, and the stuff that wasn't was played on sheets of paper of drawn out battle maps, and our minis were crumpled up pieces of different colored sticky notes. Consider the time and money investment you have available to you to run a game of D&D, and consider how much of that you want to use on things that you don't absolutely need. I would say a good prep time for a game is 1 hour of prepping should equal 1 to 2 hours of actual game time. And if you're running your first session, that probably means it's going to be a lot longer. If you only have 5 hours throughout the week to prepare a D&D game, do you want to spend one of those hours preparing playlists rather than making a more interesting adventure? My first DM ran amazing D&D with just a player's handbook, a monster manual, and a set of dice, and you can run amazing D&D with even less than that. Now that we're ready to actually prep this session, what we should do is prep the session in order of how our players are going to experience it. So the first thing that we're going to do in session 1 is probably set up the world for our players. Your introductory monologue is going to set the expectations for your world and your game, so it's really important that we get this right. Now the issue is that there's so many ways that you can start a game. You can make a whole video series about how to start a game. So instead, I'm going to give you the formula of what I use to start a campaign, and hopefully you can use it as inspiration for your own games. Now, is this a setting that your players are familiar with, or is this something brand new to them? This is going to have an effect on how you should start off. If this is their first time going into this world, you're going to want to explain the big concept stuff to them first. So if you're playing in a Star Wars game and none of your players have ever been in a Star Wars setting before, you might want to start with something like, in a galaxy far, far away, there's a great galactic empire. And with their vast armies and mighty ships, they have taken over nearly every corner of the galaxy. Hidden across distant planets, a small rebellion fights back against them. In just a handful of words, you know that this is a space setting, and it's a space setting where there's this great big empire, and that empire is evil, and luckily there are a small group of rebels that are fighting against this empire. And the party is most likely going to want to ally themselves with this rebellion when the time comes. After that, or if the party are already aware of the setting, you want to follow into the what's happening now. Sticking with the Star Wars example, recently the Empire have suffered a great humiliation at the hands of the Rebellion when they destroyed their most powerful weapon, the Death Star. Seeking revenge, the Empire is using much of their galactic resources to hunt down and destroy the Rebellion. Now, since this is the first event that you're telling the players, they're probably going to understand that this is a really important event, and they're probably going to want to keep that in mind for the upcoming adventure. They also understand that the motives of the Empire are to hunt down and destroy the Rebellion, and the Rebellion is in grave danger and likely needs the help of some unlikely heroes. And since we're playing in a pre-existing setting as well, we have now told our players exactly what time this game takes place in. They now know that, oh, this takes place right between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. There's a pretty good chance that you're going to be playing in a setting of your creation, so doing something like this doesn't really work to give your players an understanding of when in time this exists. So that could be something that you have in your opening monologue. So let's think about what time in your world's history that your game takes place in. Is this a time of naivety, where everything feels like it's going great and things are about to go wrong, but no one really notices, and the people who do notice don't want to tell anybody? Or maybe this is a time of persistence. The world is awful and terrible and dangerous. However, there's a bright light of hope at the end of this tunnel, and maybe this generation won't make it to it, but if you just keep fighting, the next generation will. And when you have the answer to that, think about what type of things might be changing in your world that could give people the hint that there's going to be this change in status quo, or what might be approaching soon calling for that change. And for the final part of your introduction, it should focus on what's happening locally. Really delve into what's happening in the area around the players. What's special about today? For Star Wars, this might be the Rebellion has established a new secret base on Hoth, hoping that they can hide out from the Empire's probes that are reaching across the galaxy. We haven't even established the player characters yet, but they know that wherever they're gonna be, they're either going to be on Hoth or they're very much about to be on Hoth very soon. Speaking of which, it's time to introduce the characters. Now, for some games, people prefer to have the party already know each other and already be a part of an adventuring party and kind of skip that whole everyone meeting each other. But for me personally, I've always really enjoyed those moments of players getting to interact with each other one-on-one as they're all just starting to meet and learn about each other. I feel like it's organic because this is often the first time we're actually getting to know who our other player characters are. And for me personally, I've had some characters who their entire characterization actually ended up being defined by the early moments where they met another character and those early interactions. So based off the way that I like to run my games, my introduction might be, you each are different members of the Rebellion, currently hiding out on Hoth. You don't know each other per se. You'd recognize each other as you crossed each other in the hall, but that's probably the most interaction you've ever had. Each of you kind of work in different departments that don't really interact with each other all the time. This is the point where we go and actually introduce these characters, give them a moment to describe themselves and what they're like, and then quickly set them off on the adventure to find the rest of the party. At most, this should take 5 minutes per player, but really we're aiming for 3 minutes per player. So in my opinion, the best way to start is with a question. Something like, okay, so tell us the name of your character, what they look like, and what would they be doing on a day like today? And this actually allows the player to create that opening scene for themselves and really delve into what their character is like before the adventure begins. You then quickly play off of how they've described the scene if there's an important NPC, telling them to get on with their day, send them out of the scene so that way they can be out in the world where they can bump into the rest of the party. So once you get through all that, it is now time for the party to come together and actually become, well, a party. So if you're following the adventure structure that I've laid out, your party should be wandering around the town or the city or the rebel base or wherever. So we have some options here. The first is just roleplay different scenes of the party going about their day and have different party members cross paths at appropriate moments. And then you just hope that the players catch on that they're supposed to try to meet at this point and join together and hope that they find a way to do that. If not, they at least interact with that PC so that way when they bump into each other later, they already know each other. In a Wild Beyond the Witchlight game I played in, it started off with all of us going to a carnival, and instead of us already knowing each other, we're all just different people who decided to go to this carnival. However, us as players knew that if I decided to go to one attraction and another player also went to the same attraction, we needed to find a way that by the time we had finished that attraction, that we would agree that we would join together on the rest of them. So, only after a few attractions, the party had already formed into a group, but we were allowed to do that organically through roleplay. Now, an issue that you can have with this is that it can eat up a lot of time roleplaying just getting your party together. And it also means that there's probably a fair amount of time of some players just sitting around waiting for their turn. Now, in session 1, I usually find that people are fine waiting and listening because they're excited for the game. However, I can totally understand you wanting to avoid that. So the second option is to hold off on your party coming together and instead go in early with that adventure hook and have the party come together after the adventure hook is already started. Now, this adventure hook or spark could be an ordinary day interrupted by an encounter. the party all come together as strangers to fight off this monster, but after seeing each other's strengths, decide to come together as a team to figure out where this monster that attacked everyone came from. Or maybe they're all in this location because they've each received a letter to be in this town at a specific time, in which they meet someone who has a quest, who wants a particular group of individuals with particular set of skill sets to get a mission done. This is more forcing the party to come together rather than letting them come together organically. However, by the time they have completed their quest for this mystery person, they will have most likely learned that they want to work together because they make a good team. So this leads into what's likely the middle of your D&D session, which should pretty much play like any normal D&D session. There's so many different ways that you can run a D&D game, so if I were to try to give advice from this point, it's either going to be too vague to be meaningful or too specific to be relevant. However, I do think it's important to talk about the end of the session. Ideally, a session ends at a narratively satisfying point. Either the party have completed some achievement, reached a point where they're long resting, or if you like a cliffhanger, right as the combat's about to start. And then you have a range of which you'd be okay with the session ending. If everyone's agreed to 3 hours of D&D, everyone's probably more okay with 2.5 hours to 3.5 hours of D&D. So if you reach that point where you want the session to end and you're 2.5 hours in, you can just call an early session of D&D. At the same time, if you've hit the 3 hour point and you know that you're about to finish this big climactic thing, just push the game a little bit farther, push it 15 minutes, and then call it once you've completed that narrative thing you wanted to happen. It's usually better to call a session early rather than pushing it to that 3 hour point and having it end abruptly and awkwardly. Speaking of an awkward point to end a video, thank you for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more like it, click that subscribe button to stay updated on any future releases. Thank you again, and this is the end of the video.